In our journey to learn and apply and create solutions, true sowing prosperity, I've interviewed some of the greatest minds in the world across so many different disciplines, but Dr. Nasha Winters is my hero. She is absolutely in a league of her own as far as the topics that we cover, bringing them all together. And as an integrative oncologist, understanding regenerative ag and everything that goes into it, this is one of my favorite conversations of all time. Dr. Winters, to say that I was looking forward to this podcast would be a great understatement for sure. But what you have done has made a massive impact on me. So when my little boy was diagnosed with cancer, I went to Amazon and bought every book that had the title cancer in it, right? Like just send me all of them. And yours, the metabolic approach to cancer with that play on it, on how you've done that, is so instrumental. And as I've dove in to understand more from the quantum side to the agriculture side to every bit of it, you put together something that's even more important and better than I even realized at the time. Because you don't know what you don't know when you're first into it. And so the book means more to me now than it did, 4 years when I read it. So if you don't care, to give us that brief introduction to how you became interested in cancer, and then now the pioneering force that you are.
Oh, well, first of all, so kind and so excited to be here. As I told you before the recording started, I love your podcast. I love the people you've interviewed. Some of them are my friends, my mentors, my teachers, my colleagues as we're trying to raise all the ships together here. So it's an absolute honor to be with you and all of your listeners. And so, golly, I say this and it ages me a bit here, but over 32 years ago now at the time of this recording, I was diagnosed with terminal cancer and not given any options. I was too far gone to even tolerate a single dose of chemotherapy. My organs were in complete failure. I had a complete bowel blockage, a tumor the size of a grapefruit on my right ovary that was pushing against all my other vital real estate within my body that was shutting down my kidneys, the whole bit. I was really malnourished. My oxygen levels were in the 70s. I mean, it was amazing. My roommate found me half conscious and rushed me to the ER. And that was after, 6-7 months of going in and out of the ER saying, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. But at 19 years old, I was just sort of written off as a histrionic, teenager, histrionic college kid who they would just write me another script. And because my whole life, my whole history, I never really understood what health was because I had never really had it. I was born with all kinds of digestive issues, was allergic to every formula because God forbid in 1971 would we offer someone breast milk, and so it was just that timing where all the different things they gave me and they settled on soy formula. I was on pharmaceuticals by the time I was 3 for my digestive issues. I like all the different things that were happening, all the medications I was taking throughout the time, diagnosed with endometriosis, PCOS, rheumatoid arthritis, later Hashimoto's, much later celiac disease, all of these conditions that just accumulated. So by the time I landed in the ER all those times, my sophomore year, summer before my sophomore year and early sophomore year of college, they just thought it was more of the same. Oh, it's just your IBS flaring. Oh, it's just your endometriosis. Oh, it's just this. And so by the time it was big enough and loud enough to nearly snuff my candle, it was too late for them to offer anything. So I didn't expect to live. That wasn't my plan. My plan as a 19-year-old pre-med student was just to understand. So working my way out, I thought, well, I just want to understand why this is happening. And so 32 plus years later, I'm still learning for myself and for the others I've had an honor to work with along the way.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. As you were going through that, the stages of getting to where you ended up at 19, it just I got chills because it was so parallel to what happened with Lander. It was like the formula, we had to give him the thickeners because he was spitting up everything. Nothing was settling. His gut was messed, and all of these things just kind of come flooding back that, I think that we can solve a lot of these things through prevention if we will stop doing some of this silliness that we're putting in our bodies. So
Absolutely.
When you got the diagnosis, and as you're trying to navigate this onslaught of informations and questions and differing opinions, right? How did you get to the point where you started going maybe against or in the integrative or in conjunction with the conventional medical systems? How did you get to the point to where you started being more open to other things?
So such a good question, because first of all, where I grew up in Kansas and moved and went to college in Colorado. And that's where I was when I was diagnosed, was in Colorado when I was in college. And I really was on the path to going to standard of care conventional medical school. That was my passion and my purpose. So I felt very passionate about the sciences. I was a biology, chemistry major at that time. I was very much pre-med, doing all my stuff, very indoctrinated into the basic sciences, into that this is, the wisdom of the scientific method. I was very much a cheerleader for that. What happened for me, however, is that system failed me. It failed me very, very, very much over the months and actually probably for the years of let's just put another script pad over her symptoms and call it good. I mean, I was put on birth control at 9 years old to help with my endometriosis, right? Those aren't normal. I started my period in third grade. I just ran into a woman I hadn't seen since then at an event. And she remembers the trauma that I was going through and imposed upon my classmates and my teacher, because none of us understood what was happening back in the late 1970s at that time, because that was not normal, nor was it common. Unfortunately, it's still not normal, but it's far more common today. So in that, I had been mismanaged, misunderstood. They told my mom, "You'll love this, having your kiddo." When I was little, I pooped once a month, whether I needed it or not. And the doctors told my mom that was just my pattern, so that was totally normal. This is the lies we tell ourselves. And so the model had been failing me for some time. So by the time I was completely without options diagnosed, I didn't have any recommendations or options from standard of care. They sent me home to die. So when you say, well, what made you choose? Well, they made me choose. There was nothing left. And so for me, I just got curious and wanted to understand why. And in doing so, accidentally stumbled across some things that might have been helpful. What was very interesting to me at that time was, again, no one was saying, why is a 19-year-old dealing with stage 4 ovarian cancer? That should have been just the first question in 1991 when this was happening. Right. And so to your point about where did you go? How did you start to learn? Well, there was no Dr. Google. There were no books out there on cancer outside of a few very, 1940s, 1950s books by people like Dr. Gerson, people by Dr. Williams, who was was kind of the enzyme for cancer doctor, looking at some of the old Ravici and Simonici work and baking soda. There were some things that were considered very, very alternative that were out there. But even those, I was alone in trying to explore them. The accidental thing that happened for me, which I'm sure is significant in how it keeps us having a conversation today, was thanks to that bowel blockage, I couldn't eat. I could not eat. It caused such excruciating pain, and it caused me to throw up every single thing. So I could only handle tiny sips of fluids, of water. And for 2.5 months, I could take in no solids. I was able to graduate to a little bit of herbal tea, graduate to a little bit of broths. And at that time I went hardcore vegan, because that's what the literature, that's the only thing I could find out there about how to eat, was to go vegan. So that's where I started on this journey. And coming from a very standard American fast food, highly processed diet, that was a huge improvement on things. I would later learn that I needed more, but that was still a few years down the road. But that accidental fasting was very interesting in that we can now look back. There's research from Dr. Moreshi from 1909 showing just the tumor debulking benefit of just water fasting. And so for me, that allowed my body to dry up all that ascites, which is the malignant fluid that was surging through my abdomen. I had to be tapped a lot. I had to have my fluid pulled at that point every few days just so I could function, because I was in excruciating pain when it would just fill up like a 9-month, pregnant belly. But I also, my body just in fasting started to resorb that fluid, started to debulk that tumor enough to take the pressure off my ureters of my kidney, seemed to take the pressure out of my liver, my portal vein, started to change the edema, the lower limb edema, because I was in full lower limb edema. My oxygen level started to improve, and that was doing nothing, basically, literally doing nothing, not even eating. You would not know this. Like in 1991, we didn't know this information. So it was just all accidental. So now, hindsight's 2020, I can look back and realize I was giving my body some tools for autophagy, some tools for my body to debulk that tumor, some tools for my body to focus on fighting the cancer versus digesting things. We wouldn't have known that at that time, right? And so those are just some of the things I've learned along the way as my body sort of stabilized despite, my efforts and anybody else's. I got kind of more curious and started studying more and started applying more things. And it's been a very slow and deliberate process. It's been completely nonlinear. That first decade, I will tell you, Logan, was touch and go many, many times over. And I'm still, like, standard of care would likely not consider me cancer-free today. But here we are. I've learned how to live well with this condition and help thousands, if not tens of thousands of others to do the same.
My goodness. So there's so many different directions. I think the parallels for stories are so important to be able to experience that, because I can imagine there are so many people that can relate to what you just said, going through that process. And so, Lander was stage 4 Wilm. So it was kidney and metastasized to lymph nodes in his chest wall. The bowel obstruction, he had a scar tissue induced bowel obstruction. It was horrible. That may have very well been the worst point of the entire thing. And then to see, I accidentally heard Dave Asprey make an offhand comment about insulin potentiated chemotherapy. Just happened to hear. And then I was like, well, what was that? And so going into there. And so, maybe that's the best segue from here. The ketogenic diet seems to have so much of a positive effect in metabolic disease and especially in cancer. So how can we create that awareness from your perspective to see if maybe a ketogenic diet is right for somebody, and why is it something that can be a very useful tool? Because, in essence, is fasting not a way to get us into a ketogenic state?
100%. I love that. And, you've had so many experts in this arena come on and speak about ketosis, ketone bodies, those pieces here. So I won't go into the details of that. But to your point about sort of a ketogenic diet is a particular medically prescribed diet that increases fat, lowers carbohydrates, and moderates or even lowers protein. That is the definition of a therapeutic ketogenic diet, where you really manipulate your macronutrients to achieve a state of ketosis. Ketosis, however, is a natural physiologic process that we can achieve in a multitude of ways. So yes, we can get there from a therapeutic ketogenic diet, as I just described. We can get there from exogenous ketone bodies. We can get there from certain pharmaceutical interventions. And we can get there from just carbohydrate restricting, even if you're all carnivore or all vegan or anything in between. And we can get there with fasting. And fasting is the fastest route. I mean, within 3 days of water fasting, most of us are in deep therapeutic ketosis unless you're really metabolically unstable. And so I want your listeners to have a sense that there's a variety of ways that you might want to experiment with yourself to see how well you can turn your body back into its beautifully designed dual system, dual energy burning system of being able to go in and out of ketosis at will, historically, seasonally, historically from what was just available around us to eat. And so I feel like it's important to give a little context because I haven't heard this from some of your interviewees, but I'm speaking to someone who's in the farming and the agricultural community as well. And so let's just go back to history, that we were all hunter-gatherers until about 10,000 years ago, which meant we were all literally walking around looking for our next meal. We burned a lot of calories to do that. And what we found was very much about a higher protein content and a lower carbohydrate content just by nature. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of resources to actually take in a high carbohydrate diet, to grow a high carbohydrate diet. And so we were literally like, the fruit of those days were teeny little berries that were wild harvested, or tiny little apples on trees. Like today we hybridize things to make them like giant apples the size of your head that are loaded with sugar. Like that did not come from nature. That came from human intervention. So 10,000 years ago, we put down some roots and we became Neolithic farmers. And that moved all through the whole Fertile Crescent. The whole Mediterranean region of the world is considered sort of the origins of our modern day farming. And as such, what happened at that time is we also introduced a new gene that didn't exist prior to Neolithic farming, which is the HLA gene, the human leukocyte antigen gene. This is also where we first started having the first inklings of autoimmunity, of issues around amylase and carbohydrate response, ingestion, and things like how we respond to infections, especially viruses. Later, we'd find that the HLA is also very highly responsive to or reactive to mold. But one of the big ones that came out of the HLA is celiac disease. So because we weren't farming, we weren't eating gluten prior to that time, we introduced a new gene that said, hey, a lot of us can't tolerate this. And then here we are in the 1800s, we started the Industrial Food Revolution. That's when we started to process flour, sugar, and salt to what we basically are still being exposed to today, but even in greater volumes. So the next big change happened in the 1850s when we moved into the Industrial Food Revolution. That was basically thousands of years. Suddenly we make another big hit, and suddenly everyone has access to these foods globally, 24/7, seasonally, in a way we never had before. That changes things up in our systems and how we can adapt and respond to the environment in, on, and around us. Fast forward World War II. That's how much of our modern day farming practices took root today, is from all the leftover ammunition from the wars. So we said, hey, we've got all this leftover ammo. I've got an idea. Let's put some of it into the pharmaceutical industry and let's put the other of it into the agricultural industry. Just the reality, right? It's like let's make nitrogen. Let's start to fix nitrogen. Let's start to use fertilizers. It was also in that time, within a few years, we started adding in hormones into our animal feed processes. We started grain feeding our animals. We started the CAFO farming practices. We started to change things up because we were under the illusion that the only way we were going to be able to feed the world was this way. So it was well-intentioned. We thought we were doing the right thing. And then folks in the late 1960s, like Dr. Huber, bless him, the man is still on a mission to tell us the dangers of glyphosate. Still, the fact that we're having conversations about this all these years later is horrifying to me, but we started to kind of experiment putting that into our food systems. Now it's ubiquitous. You rain and you get polluted. Today, it doesn't matter if it's organic grains or organic legumes. That's what sequesters the glyphosate into the soil. It fixes it into the soil. And so what we've done to these poor grains and what we've done to our diet and what we've done to our planet and to the soil has led to these vulnerabilities that we are today. And so I say all these things because I grew up in Kansas among a bunch of wheat farmers. I lived near 4 Superfund sites in military. On your military bases in Wichita, Kansas. I was a latchkey kid who lived only on highly processed food. It would take me years to learn that I have celiac disease. It would take me years to understand that all the things that we thought were IBS and all those things were just my genetics telling me that I was not eating and living the way I was divinely wired to be so. And that the problems of today, most of us are living out of rhythm with ourselves, with our genetics, and with the world around us. And so this is what has led to these vulnerabilities. And so when people say to me, gosh, well, you also talk about the stressors and the emotions and the traumas that cause cancer in adults. people always come back around to me and like, well, what about the little kids who get cancer? Much like your kiddo, right? And so what they don't understand is these kids are,
epigenetics.
Your son started in the womb of your grandmother. I mean, isn't that crazy? Right? Of the womb of who she carried in her body and what they carried in their body. This is 3 generations in each human. So the things we've done in the last several generations have impacted the next lineage. And so that is the nature of epigenetics. And so even traumas are passed down generationally, not just the toxins that we're now routinely exposed to. And so to me, these beautiful little beings are like concentrated, right? They concentrate things far more than we big people do. And so it's more of a miracle to me that more children aren't born with situations like what your son went through. So I know that was long-winded, but I really want context for your listeners. Yeah.
No, I think it's beautiful, and it's something that I have struggled with significantly with the Sowing Prosperity platform, because it's on the outside looking in, it's not niche, right? It's not focused in on one thing. But when you really understand what is going on with the the human experience, you can't differentiate the agriculture, the environment, the health, all physically, mentally, emotionally. It's not compartmentalized. It's all hyper connected. And so that's why, we cover such a broad topic everywhere from having, oncology to agriculture to business, because we can't facilitate any of this if we don't have those entrepreneurs implementing it, right, as a service or as a product. So I love that you went through that, and I think it's spot on. So something I do have a question on in regards to the what you're doing with the hospital and bringing in a farm that has a hospital on it, in using modalities and therapies that are outside of the conventional. How do you navigate putting that together? Because it's beautiful. I'm just thrilled at what I have seen with that. And where are we? How do we navigate the complexities of bringing all of that together? And where are you on that?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this, because this has been, when I was going through my own process all those years ago, I started having, I guess for lack of a better word, visions of what healthcare should be, of what educating and empowering people to live healthy in an unhealthy environment should look like. And for me, I'm a systems thinker. It's very difficult for me to silo off any of my ideas. Like, that's why I love that you really highlighted that you have to bring in all the financials, the agriculture, the education, the healthcare, all those things have to be addressed all at once. And in my journey, I had to go literally all over the world to piecemeal together the ability to save my own life, right? And I could not depend on one place to do that. And so I started dreaming about what would it look like to have one place to do all of this. And I don't know if it's because I am from a farming background, but I knew that our farmers, our soil, our food resources were at the literal foundation of this. And so my tagline has always been about addressing the soil to the soul, and everything in between has been incredibly focused for what I've seen of what it's going to take to really do prevention and to do maintenance of and creation of wellness on this planet today. So some of the most powerfully healing places I've been to are just places of nature. Not even like no churches there, no hospitals there, no retreat centers there, not even a put together farm there. Just being in nature offers us so many tools of resource and resilience. When you then manicure that down a little bit and intentionally start to grow things in accordance with the rhythm of nature and of that land and of that region and that geography, and you get into the cycles of nature and you use methods like biodynamic and permacultural farming and whatnot, where you are really heating the rhythm around you, that in and of itself establishes another layer of fortification of resilience into the human experience. Then when you can start to walk among that, work among that, live among that, a whole nother. I mean, we grew up, we were around, we all raised our farms, our own communities. I mean, that's where we all started until postmodern, industrial revolution. We started moving into the cities, abandoning our farms and our communities. Now we've done some cool things where we've started kind of urban farm and whatnot. And, we're bringing some of that back, like bringing the farms to the cities, but it's not enough. We need to kind of go back to this. And so when I look at some of the cool things that are happening in healthcare, like hospital, like farm to hospital programs, they're great, but it's like a tiny little Band-Aid on a huge dam. Sure. Because those hospitals are still highly toxic places, filled with nosocomial infections. The duct systems are like loaded with aspergillus. Every wall surface has MRSA and bursa, like these highly non-responsive to antibiotic infections everywhere because we've over-sanitized the environment. We've over-medicated our bodies that now these super bugs exist. I mean, probably the worst place to be when you're sick is in a hospital, but you have to take advantage of that sometimes, right? And so there's that piece. There's the light. Can we just talk about the horrible lighting of hospital environments? And the fact that every patient who ever has to stay the night in the hospital will tell you they do not get a good night's sleep. Nothing about that's a good night. Whistles going off, bells going off, blue lights everywhere, people coming in and out all night, checking your vitals. You are not resting. That is so critical. And then the food, the average, I mean, Bob Jones that you had on, he taught me that the average cost of a meal for a person or the average cost per day of each patient in the hospital is what, I think $1.69 a person. How can you nourish the most vulnerable populations on $1.69 a day? All right. So these are the things I looked at. It's like this, great. We've got hospitals are maybe bringing in some farm to table foods. It's like lipstick on a pig. That is absolutely just marketing and not changing the system. And when I started looking at health centers that are retreats now, there's huge global effort of people moving into like wellness destinations. People are intuitively drawn to going to places where they can interact with the very food that's feeding them in this environment, whether they've got their hands in the soil with a farmer or they're in the kitchen helping prepare the food at these places. Something changes in their physiology. And so I started to see that we literally have a hospital as just another crop on a farm, that it is coming up of that soil and out of that soil to really nourish us, to really treat and support us, to truly cultivate wellness, not just mitigate disease. And so that's when I started to really put pen to paper, started on these ideas, started talking to a lot of people over many decades, have come very close several times over the years to interested investors who thought this was a great idea, willing to pay for the whole thing. But what I recognized very quickly is they would come in and take it over and it would look just like everything else within a matter of months. And so what we're creating doesn't exist. And the relationships now are ripe for this. And I have to thank COVID for this. And I have to thank the global crisis of cancer rates doubling, that 1 in 2 of us will experience it in our lifetime, that our metabolic health, less than 7% of us are considered metabolically healthy in the developed countries of the world today. We're in a crisis and our medical system can't serve it. And so this is how, instead of me trying to fix the model, which is where I spent the first 20 some years of my career, I'm now just building a new one and luckily keep drawing in more and more people interested in doing the same.
Sometimes the only way to win is to not play the game. And I think that you're spot on with that. As you've gone through everything, Dr. Winters, it brings back something that was told to me, that the messenger is as important as the message. And that was Kelly, podcast extraordinary producer behind the screen. And he brought that up after we did an interview with somebody that was saying very similar things along the lines, but you're able to articulate it and come across in a way that's very positive. It's very empathetic, whereas, the other wasn't, and but it's very, very, very important to get this message out when we're talking about, and we haven't gone there yet. And I've got another direction I want to go first, but when we're talking about things that are hard to grasp, for a lot of people. We're talking about EMFs. We're talking about blue light. We're talking about all the things that we're exposed to that I don't think very many people fully realize the depth of how bad it's destroying us. Right. And I homeschool my kids, not because of any of the conventional reasons. It's because I don't want them sitting under those lights for 9 hours.
Totally.
I mean, that's the biggest reason. And then food and then on and on. But there's multiple. But when you go through what you're saying, it brings in what, Travis Christofferson has told me, Dr. Stephanie Seneff. I mean, you're tying in some of these extremes, outliers, but bringing it all together. And I just want to commend you for that. I think you've done a beautiful job. The way you present it is incredible. And I think that that's the reason that this is going to work and you're going to be able to save countless lives long term. So I want to segue just a little bit because I think this is very, very, very pertinent to a lot of the previous guests that I've had. The very first book that I really read was the China study. Okay. And it scared me. I thought meat caused cancer. It terrified me, right? Just again, I ordered everything I possibly could get my hands on book wise when Lander was diagnosed. And then pretty early on, I got Dr. Barry's book, Lies My Doctor Told Me, and it completely broke my brain. Like, I couldn't even finish it. I said, I can't do this. Because I was convinced that, Chris beat cancer and the China study and all this plant-based dialogue that we had around cancer. So my question is, if we are looking at a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, how can we gauge that? How can we gauge the efficacy if that's something we should participate in? And there's also some varying degrees. Dr. Chafee will say eat muscle meat. Dr. Kiltz, he was saying the same thing, but you want it very fatty. And so there's a lot of nuances even in that space. So how do you, from the cancer lens, gauge carnivore?
First of all, such a great question. Second of all, if you haven't had Denise Minger on your podcast, you should, because she does two beautiful. She did the first time China study came out. She did a kind of a breakdown of that, kind of an unpacking of it. And then 10 years later, revisited it and did another amazing breakdown of it to really help people understand. People like her, people like Rob Wolf and is it Holy Cow? I think like some of these guys really talk. I know you had Joel Salatin on here a few times, like to really help us understand that. I think everyone would agree that standard CAFO raised meat is a super fun sight on legs, right? Like just we shouldn't ingest that. That is an ecological disaster. Like we are 100% are on the same page. But it hurts my heart when we come back. And mind you, I was vegan for 7 years and an additional 20 years on top of that, vegetarian. And I did my darndest to keep myself alive. And it was a hard battle. It took me a lot because I was going on dogma and not on data of what was happening in what I was feeling in my body, what my labs were showing, what my imaging was showing. I was running my story with dogma. I think a lot of these influencers that are out there, I'll be really frank, I think they're driven by dogma as well, on both sides of the camps, from the plant-based to the carnivore and everything in between. And so we are at a time where we can easily and relatively inexpensively know what's working for somebody or not. And also know when to change course if maybe you need to do this for a period of time and then you need to do something different, right? So to be open, willing, curious, flexible, adaptable is key. So when we look at I've walked you all through the history of our nutrition, our farming, our food production. This is why you see people who are very compelling about a plant-based diet, because it seems like it would be a better fit given what we are seeing in the really highly toxic CAFO farmed animal protein. But the carnivores have just as strong of an understanding of what the mass production of grains and legumes are doing to our soil and our planet as well. Both are right. But where's that middle ground? And that is where I look to you the farmers, the regen ag folks, the people who understand the cycles of nature and the ecosystems involved in maintaining and creating a good cyclical nature, those are where these influencers are not literally in the fields having these conversations. They're making some assertions out of a lack of understanding of the complexity of this beautiful ecosystem. And so when you get down to which is better, please go ahead. Please, yeah.
Pertinent to what you just said, when we're talking about the influencers, whether they have millions and millions and millions of followers, you can still have a conversation with somebody when you know a subject forwards and backwards, and you know when they don't know, right? Like you can tell when they are not well versed in a given subject, right? And I have found that to be the case so many times, and with a rare exception of you and a few more, say Morley Robbins has blown my mind on numerous occasions. Morley is well versed across more things than I can even wrap my mind around. The influencers are missing big important pieces. Big important pieces. That's why I keep trying to dive into these questions and hit it from the other angles. And I refer to it as the lattice work of mental models, right? Because they intersect, and you can see where somebody's missing something or where they're right coming from multiple angles. So I just want to say that, like, I have experienced that talking to, the best of the best. And I think they're right, but I think that we have big blind spots too. So I don't want to cut you off, but I think that
it's perfect to reiterate.
We emphasize, what you were saying more. And that's why through your lens, through the cancer, I want to understand carnivore, because I don't have an agenda. I want to know what's going to make my son thrive. Right. So.
And, it's funny, just this morning, because I train clinicians all over the world. So we have 268 doctors who've come through our training program. We have 54 that just started in our training program. We matriculate 2 cohorts a year of that. We also train patient advocates, most of which have been patients themselves or caregivers of patients. We're now over 300 in that area, with another cohort starting in April, probably another 75 to 100 people joining us. We are starting to blanket the planet, and our mantra is test, assess, address, don't guess. Okay. And it's so much about, let's get out of the way of the folks fighting over the dietary dogma. Right. So even even this week, there was a horrible study that came out about the dangers of all-cause mortality of intermittent fasting. When you look at who funded the study, when you break it down of actually what the study model was, I don't know how stuff like this gets published. It should be toilet paper at best. I mean, it's so sad. Just like a lot of the other studies that come out there. That's why there's so much confusion. These headlines are very sensationalistic and they don't tell the whole story. You have to be a savvy consumer and really know how to read and understand and follow the money in these studies. So there's that piece. The other piece is when we look at, first of all, the carnivores are correct in that in a nose to toes or nose to tail, full on organ, muscle. But how many of us, we don't go and buy that when we go to the grocery store? We buy like the pretty, beautiful white breast or the nice, simple cut of meat. We leave all the other stuff that's actually where the nourishment is off the table. Our parents, our grandparents and great grandparents ate all that stuff, but we don't. We've kind of cleaned things up too much. But you have to be able to eat nose to tail to get the proper nutrients. So true carnivores who eat that way and who are very cognizant of the quality of where their meat comes from and how it was raised. If it's finished on grain, you just destroyed all of its nutritional status. That's actually been well established. So it worries me also when a lot of the influencers there say, it doesn't matter, it's too expensive to eat this other way. You just do whatever you do. Well, I am here to tell you, because I see the difference in their labs very much, especially around their insulin and their insulin growth factor, which is the driving force of 75% of all cancers out there. So it's not a good idea to just go hog wild, and I mean that pun intentionally, on the protein if you don't know its source, if you don't know your own genetics around it, and if you don't monitor the metrics to show, is this a fit or not a fit, and when is it stopped being a fit, and when is it time to change course? So there's that end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is the vegan, community, because that's actually where I started and where a lot of the sort of the popularity in the cancer, how to feed yourself for cancer lies. That's still the majority on the teeter-totter here. The heaviest part of the teeter-totter is under the plant-based community. That's
Absolutely.
what's out there in the public arena. And yet what we see over and over in labs, of the hundreds of thousands, if not millions I've run at this point in my career and evaluated, patients with cancer are classically deficient in vitamin D, selenium, vitamin A, vitamin K, magnesium, B12, vitamin C. I'm missing a few others, but those are like the biggies, right? And the crazy part of that is the majority of those things you must ingest animal protein to get those. And yes, you can get vitamin D2 from a mushroom. That's not what your body needs or wants, folks. That's not the type of vitamin D it needs to actually be a genetic reprogrammer, an immune biological signaling agent. It's you don't get that in that same way. Same thing with B12. You can get B12 from spirulina, and those types of things. But oftentimes that comes with another price to pay. The spirulina, these are chelates. They chelate the toxins out of our environment. And so you take a bunch of that, you are replenishing your own toxic storage in many cases. And really the most bioavailable is coming from a plant or a animal source, not a plant source. Those are just some examples. The craziest thing is what we absolutely know as vegans and vegetarians are classically low in all of those nutrients. All right. So it's like you look at that, and when you look at both ends of the spectrum, and if you're doing a poorly applied diet in any of those areas, if you do not know absolutely what you're doing as a vegan or as a carnivore, you will cause more harm than good. Right. And so that in between, as we get more into this, I am of the belief, because of just study and where I am, and I'm always changing I evolve with my understanding of where the data supports always, but I'm of the belief that we are omnivores. And that in that we have variations on that theme. So if you're if you're from, like Siberia, your body needs one thing. If you grew up in China, another. If you are, of Northern European descent, another. I mean, we literally were wired with information in our cells to know how to interface with the environment in, on, and around us. And when you go against that, you cause problems.
Well, and you hit on something earlier that I think is so pertinent that we don't discuss. I very, very, very rarely hear it say that the seasonality of what's available should be taken into consideration, right? So like in Arkansas in January, you're not eating a plant-based diet. I guarantee you, right? No. Like in the temperate climate in the north or raw, it's not happening. Yeah. You're going to have ancestrally speaking, an animal-based diet in the winter. I mean, that just... And so the seasonality of it, I think, is something that just like by being so disconnected from nature, by being so disconnected from the agriculture and the food production, we miss that. Like, mangoes are not available in New York in January, right? Like they're not. So exactly. I'm trying to be super respectful of your time. I could talk to you forever, I think.
Sorry, but I know we are going all over the place. Sorry.
But it's so important. Well, let me just get the questions out real quick and we'll circle back. I want to understand MTHFR a little bit better. I'm homozygous on one and then heterozygous on another. So we know that Lander has got that as a factor. I've not done the full panel on that. Perfect. So one, I want to understand that. And two, how do we mitigate the downsides of the conventional treatments? This is what keeps me up at night. This is what absolutely keeps me just maxed out is Lander received chemo, Lander received radiation. We had surgeries. How do I manage his little body? We're 5 years out, but I still am as worried about him. And I say worried and try to be the most positive context as possible. But I want to get those answered. But on the methylation piece, when I figured that out and I read, the dirty genes and I dove into that and I tried to fix it myself and I just pounded the methylated B vitamins and what I assume is over methylated into this deep, dark hole of despair. And it was terrible. It scared me. Like it was probably the most depressed I've ever been in my life. Yes. And it was simply taking supplements. Right. It was bad. So how do you address that And then if you
Yes.
can, how do we mitigate some of the long-term effects of conventional treatment?
So good. So good. Well, first of all, if you haven't had Ben Lynch on, who's the author of Dirty Genes, that would be great. My partner in crime / husband is an epigenetic guru. He actually usually wears a t-shirt that says I'm one bad MTHFR. So I think you'd probably love that. So it's kind of hilarious because, you see that word MTHFR and it kind of conjures up what that word kind of means. And then my colleague, Dr. Shalise Pratt, her specialty is pediatrics and this methylation issues in the pediatric population. Okay. So you two should probably talk as well.
Absolutely.
But this is about, so when we have one copy, you talked about heterozygous copy, that's from one of your parents. The homozygous is that both parents pass that down to you. When we have a heterozygous SNP, whether it's MTHFR or something else, that usually translates to about that SNP, that gene is working about 70% of the time, right? So it's still functioning, but you might need to help it along a little bit. When you have the homozygous, however, it's working less than 30% of the time. So it's going to take a lot more input to change how it expresses. What happened with the excitement around pushing like SNP treatment, so single nucleotide polymorphisms such as MTHFR, is we started treating the SNP. But you have to treat the container in which that SNP is swimming in. That's the key. So you got to live it firsthand of over methylating the body. And it's funny because actually one of the worst side effects that somebody will tell me when they've overdone their B vitamins or their methyl support cocktail is they go into, like you just said, a dark cloud, or you'll see a kid have an effing meltdown galore in like a grocery store. And the rescue for that, ironically, is niacin. So you could just take an old 25, 50 milligram. If you are someone who's over methylated yourself, just keep some niacin on hand at home. You'll flush like crazy, but it will stop it. Like it's just like, just stops it in its tracks. It's pretty wild for that. But this is the thing, is context is everything. So the way even if you have these bad genes, if you're living a good life, a good lifestyle, a good rhythm, you're changing the expression of those genes. You don't get rid of the gene, but you change the way it's expressing. You either silence it or express it depending on what its natural working state is. So you over-treated it. That's all. That's all you did. But if you had just gone back to like living in rhythm of nature, getting in really high quality food, maybe in a time restricted eating window, made sure that you were getting your organ meats to get your B vitamins in their whole form versus in this synthetic or supplemental form, watched your light exposure. I mean, the issues of MTHFR turn into fertility, mental illness, cardiovascular disease, thyroid dysfunction, cancers of all kinds. These are the types of expressions when it's deranged. And so when you think about that, they're all metabolic diseases. So making sure you're keeping your insulin in check, and those pieces are what are actually going to treat your MTHFR and all the other SNPs in the mix. So with that, the other thing is to know with your homozygous and your heterozygous, one of those is an A1298C, and the other one is a C677T. Means Greek to most people listening, but if you have the C677T, even if it was the heterozygous or the homozygous, your way of knowing if it's expressing is to check your homocysteine level. Run a blood test. If your homocysteine level is above 7, you are likely having some hiccups in the expression of that gene. We don't have to guess. We can test, and we can know if we need to address it spot on. Yeah, pretty cool. And the same thing we look at when we look at
I love that. Well, thank you. Thank you for laying that out.
Context with all the others.
I love it. That's, I know we've only got like 9 minutes left. Okay. So let's circle back. I thank you for laying that out. I think the gene SNPs are very, very complex. And I think that we need to have somebody that's well-versed in that and not try to fix it ourselves, because, that's, and don't guess, test. I love it. I'm going to get that t-shirt made for
I love, good deal. Well, before we leave that really quick, I want to just highlight back to our carnivore conversation. If people have APOA2 SNPs, certain APOE3, 3, 4 SNPs, if people have ACSLY SNPs, if they've got any of these actually make you more vulnerable to having red meat increase your insulin levels. So my husband would love to be a carnivore, but if he has a good steak, his ketones drop, his glucose goes up, and his insulin goes up. So he has to
Really?
moderate his protein intake to fit his genetics, despite the fact he would love to be a carnivore. I would love to be a vegan. That's what I crave. But I have all the SNPs between HLA and TCF7LL2 and others that I do not process carbohydrates well. So for me, it's the carbs that cause my insulin resistance versus the protein. So I have to tweak it for my own body. And so when people are like, it's all this or all that, or it's only this or only that, we have to be very careful how we represent that, because we have means of testing, as I mentioned, like homocysteine, for instance, how that's expressing. But we also can wear things like continuous glucose monitors. We can do ketone, finger sticks to look at our blood ketone levels. We can look at urinary ketone levels, even urinary sulfite levels, to see how we're processing or methylating or detoxifying. Then we know if whatever we're doing is working or not. And so I say these things so that folks get away from the dogma and get into the data, because we have really cool means of knowing and understanding what's working for us at any given moment.
I love that. I love that. You got to get a lot more episodes out on your podcast too, because you do such a phenomenal job of, well, for one, getting amazing guests on. Deborah is her name. Deborah
Davis.
Goodness, she blew my mind. Amazing. So, all right. One thing I really want to line up, because this is something I felt was super easy way to address the side effects of the traditional treatments was melatonin. Right. And so now I talked to Jack Kruse, talked to John Lawrence, talked to, a wide range, Dr. Russell Ryder, and you have varying opinions on that. Right. And so the exogenous, the supplementing with the melatonin, to me, obviously I want your opinion. To me, anybody with cancer, it just feels like that's something they should be considering, considering it with somebody. When you talk to, Jack, he's on the other end of that spectrum. Dr. Lawrence is like, he's like giving literally grams to patients. So what's your take on that? And then if you have any other way of mitigating some of those side effects.
So I used to be a little bit more in line with where Jack Kruse was. I was a little nervous about over supplementing. I would use it in the midst of treatment to mitigate side effects of treatment. So high doses of chemotherapy, radiation. It's definitely a radiosensitizing agent. So I think no one would disagree that you should use the high doses during radiation to mitigate and strengthen the response of radiation to the cancer cell. But when we get into the long term, I was always hesitant of that. But then I started becoming really good friends with people like Dr. Ryder, right? And looking at their research and seeing the data and then applying it to myself and to others, that I am very comfortable, that I agree with you. I feel like this is one of those, and probably one of the most studied supplements in the cancer space that has a lot of really good data behind it, that this is a must-have, I think, in patients undergoing cancer. Now, I say this because there is a caveat. I do not use it in non-solid tumor cancer types unless just exactly during the window of maybe radiation or helping with some of the side effects of chemo short term. There is some evidence that it potentiates leukemias, lymphomas, multiple myelomas, melanomas. So I stay away from it in high doses in that situation, except for during standard of care. But all solid tumor types, it's a must-have for me. And especially if it's a estrogen, like a very estrogen sensitive, such as prostate, breast, uterine, ovarian, lung, colorectal, brain. Those are all very estrogen dominant cancer types, which surprises people when they hear that. I use it there, and especially when it's metastasized to the bone being your largest endocrine organ. And so it's very, very powerful in these arenas. And I'm usually giving patients anywhere from 300 to 500 milligrams a day, and sometimes higher, just depending on the situation. And so there were years where I felt very comfortable at 20 to 40. I'm definitely, maybe baseline 150 today. So it's such a good cleanup. It's anti-angiogenic, it's anti-inflammatory, it's a natural aromatase inhibitor, it's a natural selective estrogen receptor modifier. It potentiates many of our standard of care therapies. It's a radiosensitizer, and it just resets your circadian rhythm. And the irony is that at those really high levels, it doesn't really impact your sleep. It's at the lower levels, like the 3 milligrams, 5 milligrams. So a lot of people are like, oh my God, I'm so weird on it at 5. I'm like, take 500 and see that it's probably a whole different animal, because you get into a different mechanism of action altogether there. And you talked about like, how do you mitigate for your kiddo? first of all, you do the same thing we do for adults. We want to look under the hood and make sure we're testing and assessing and seeing what's off, especially as he's getting closer to puberty. That's where some things may manifest more. It's like and I suspect, given the way your diet and your lifestyle is with your kiddo, that you're doing all the things, because the studies do show that kids who've undergone treatment for cancer will have a higher likelihood of cancer and other chronic illnesses. That's just the sequela of the nature of the beast. But that's based on population studies of people who do nothing. Yeah. And Logan, you do everything. And so you're already cleaning up this kid's terrain. You're already giving him the best opportunities. It's really important to know his SNPs and know what makes him tick and work with his nature versus against it. It's really important to do terrain evaluations, not just, hey, I'm going to screen you this year for cancer. We have to look at the environment, and make sure that he's doing really well there. And as he changes through phases of his life, you've got to do different types of testing. So he'll do different types of testing once he initiates puberty and into his early 20s and into his early 30s. You'll be looking at different things that are the sequela of these medications. And a lot to do. In fact, one other person you'll have to have on your show, her book comes out in May. One of my students, as well as just a dear friend and colleague who's taught me so much, Dr. Dagmara Bain, she has a book on pediatric integrative oncology coming out in May. You got to have her on.
We got to line that one out. Thank you. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. Your perspective, your kindness, and your delivery. It's incredible. So I'm even more of a fan and supporter of your work. So where can we best learn about up-to-date things with you in the hospital and what you're doing?
Oh, thank you so much. And I know we probably went all over the map here, but I appreciate the opportunity just to have a conversation. You can find the best place to start is at mtih.org. That stands for Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health.org. That will get you back to my site, the drnasha.com site. That will get you all the podcasts that I've been honored to be interviewed on, as well as the new podcast that you alluded to, Logan. Thank you for that. We'll have to get you on over there, which is Metabolic Matters podcast. You'll learn about the hospital. You'll learn about our data platform. You'll learn about our laboratory. You'll learn about the events where we're presenting. You'll learn about our education platform for both patients, advocates, and providers. You'll learn what's firing me up right now, research and things I try to stay on top of, and just know what we're up to with regards to building the first ever truly integrative residential oncology hospital and research institute on a 1,200-acre organic regenerative farm. So there you have it.
Love it. I absolutely love it. Thank you for your time and your work and just sticking with it. You've stuck with it. So thank you. And we'll keep you posted.
Thanks so much, Logan. And to all of your listeners, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Sowing Prosperity. Be sure to follow along across the social media platforms, including YouTube, and be sure to go to sowingprosperity.com.